Okay, this is Wednesday of week 1. This is the 140-160 requirements class. Okay, we're going to begin with some drills from our Tangle Tamers book. These are some medical terms. For the record, bloodshot eyes, excessively sweating, arteriosclerosis, Homan's sign, hazardous medications, anti-inflammatory drug, life-saving treatments, blood splatter, fainting spell, bullet wound, bone protruding, temporal region, epiphyseal cartilage, transverse process, cervical vertebra, tensile strength, acromion process, ensiform cartilage, ventricular arrhythmia, medical treatment, institutional care, liver damage, watery eyes, cancer in remission, pharmaceuticals flourished, severe headache, neuroradiologist, dental plates, gaping wound, circumferential growth, adjoining vertebrae, spinous process, thoracic portion, shoulder girdle, sternoclavicular, sacroiliac joints, relieve symptoms, myocardial infarction, drugs manufacturer, symptom of syphilis, blotchy complexion, high blood pressure, mastectomy surgery, Colles fracture, obviously broken, neuropsychologist, human anatomy, non-steroidal medication, cushioning shocks, peculiar formation, rounded projections, sliding movement, thickened edge, os anomenatum, side view, considerable mobility, continues downward, glenoid cavity, spool-shaped, face downward, metacarpal bones, fluid secreted, fluoroscopic method, opaque fluids, immediate effect, skin surface, develops frequently, infected areas, signifying usually, healing period, inadequate fixation, surgical incision, single bone, ascending branch, symphysis pubis, natural designation, slightly depressed, styloid processes, cylindrical shape, longitudinal arch, sensitized film, proper juxtaposition, mechanical contrivances, patient reclines, scar tissue, positive alteration, drawing nourishment, green stick type, indirect violence, ambulatory traction, juncture point, descending ramus, expanding portion, rounded protuberance, straightening limbs, center line, patellar tendon, impacted fracture, inflammatory disease, ionizing chamber, remaining constant, commonly applied, healing process, measuring instrument, prescribed exercises, operative reduction, under anesthesia, diminishing quantities. This is some literary warm-up for the record. One of the things I always believe is that no matter how bad something is, you can take something positive out of it. The one time I wasn't sure of that was on September 11. I usually wake up at 6:30 or 7 in the morning. That day, I happened to wake up earlier. I turned on the television, and as I was flipping through the channels, I saw that a plane had crashed into the North Tower of the World Trade Center. My initial reaction was that it was a terrible accident. Then I saw another plane fly into the South Tower, and I realized that I was witnessing an act of terrorism. I woke up my wife, Vanessa. As we sat and viewed the tragic events, we grieved for the victims and their families. We prayed for the survivors. We watched with disbelief as our great country was attacked. We both knew things would never be the same. Our country and our lives would be changed forever. I had a commercial shoot that day. I called it off. Like the rest of America, my wife and I spent the day glued to the television, watching the horrific images over and over again. My heart ached as I watched family members searching the streets for their loved ones. The pain and fear in their eyes is something I will never forget. I sat on my couch overwhelmed with emotion. I was sad and angry and even a little bit confused. I could not understand how something this horrible could have happened. I wanted answers and explanations. Who was responsible for taking the lives of so many innocent people? What was their motivation? How could our leaders have let this happen? As the day went on, my mind was flooded with so many thoughts. I kept thinking about the people on those planes and in those buildings, and about how their families had no idea that such horrible things were happening to them. There was no one to help the victims. They had nowhere to turn. I wanted so badly to be able to do something. The feeling of powerlessness was terrible. I thought about all of the firefighters going into the burning buildings to rescue people and never coming out. It reminded me of my grandfather, who was a Philadelphia firefighter and a captain of a firehouse. Growing up, I heard my grandfather tell stories about numerous rescues where he and his comrades put their lives on the line to save people they had never even met. As a child, I did not understand his job or why doing something that risked his life could bring him so much joy. Now I realize his happiness was derived from his devotion to helping people. A lot of people say that athletes are heroes, but I know that's not really true. The real heroes are firefighters and police officers, the men and women willing to risk their lives to save others. I really like the new NBA public service spots, which show footage of those policemen and firefighters and NBA stars such as Ray Allen of the Milwaukee Bucks saying, "We know who the real heroes are." I hear older and wiser people talk about the attack on Pearl Harbor and the Kennedy assassination and how drastically those events affected them. For my generation, the tragedy of September 11 paralleled that of Pearl Harbor. We will be talking about the devastating effect this day had on our country and our lives as individuals for years to come. It wasn't until a few weeks after September 11 that I began to see that perhaps some good did come from this tragedy. People seem different now, more understanding, more tolerant. We seem to have our priorities more in order, and we're able to put things in perspective in a more constructive way. Little things that seemed to be such a bother before are no longer a big deal. Personally, I am more patient than I was. I realize life is too short and too precious to let myself get upset over trivial things. Life is also too short to carry grudges, and therefore I've become more forgiving and understanding. I've learned also that you can't take things for granted. You know how we always say, "See you later." One thing I've realized from September 11 is that you can't ever say that for sure. Things change in the blink of an eye. People go to work and don't come back. One minute they're living and the next minute they're not. And it doesn't matter who you are. There's nothing you can do about it. Bill Cosby's son was killed. Michael Jordan's father was killed. We never know when our time will be here. So we all need to make the most of every minute we have. You try to learn from what happened. You can't be consumed by it. You can't live by it. All you can do is just live. The above article entitled, "I Won't Take See You Later for Granted," was written by Kobe Bryant, a guard for the Los Angeles Lakers NBA basketball team. The article appeared in the December 24th, 2001 edition of Newsweek. Mr. Bryant's remarks echo sentiments felt throughout the United States of America. As Americans, we should all appreciate life more, and as the saying goes, don't sweat the small stuff. Okay, this is some jury charge material for the record. Mr. Foreman and ladies and gentlemen of the jury, as I previously stated to you by this indictment, the defendant stands charged with driving a motor vehicle while his license to drive was suspended, that being prohibited by the law of this state. Now this places upon the state, since they make that charge against this defendant, the burden of proving his guilt to your satisfaction by the evidence beyond any reasonable doubt. The burden in every case is always upon the state, in a criminal case, to prove what it charges against the defendant beyond any reasonable doubt. It must be proved to that extent before a jury would be warranted in returning a verdict of guilty. Every accused is presumed by law to be innocent, and that innocence remains with him throughout the trial of the case until it is removed by evidence which convinces a fair and impartial jury that he is guilty beyond any reasonable doubt. Therefore, it is essential that you understand what is meant by that term reasonable doubt. The term reasonable doubt means exactly what it says, not just any doubt, not fanciful words, not a make-believe doubt, not a made-up doubt, but a doubt that is reasonable. Sometimes we find there is substantial doubt that arises out of the evidence or lack of evidence in a case. Reasonable doubt, therefore, is simply a doubt for which a reason can be given in the exercise of good, sound common sense, and it is to that degree that the proof must be shown by the evidence in this case before you could find this defendant guilty. The question that you will answer is, does the evidence prove to your satisfaction that this defendant is guilty of what is charged against him beyond any reasonable doubt? It is as simple as that. Now, what has or has not been proved by the evidence is for you and you alone to determine. The facts as proven by the evidence are for you and you alone to decide. Nothing that I say to you should be taken by you as being any expression on my part as to what the evidence has or has not proved. Now, the evidence consists of the testimony that you have heard, and I believe there are one or two exhibits that have been offered into evidence. They too are considered a part of the evidence and are to be considered by you. You decide what the evidence proves and apply the law to it as I charge it to you, and from that you arrive at your verdict. And in determining what has been proved beyond a reasonable doubt, you can believe or accept all that a witness says, or you can disbelieve all or reject all that a witness says, or you can believe part and disbelieve part, accept part and disbelieve part. Credibility or believability of the testimony and evidence that is laid out before you is entirely a matter for you to pass upon. Now, turning to the law applicable to this particular crime as charged against this particular defendant. The law makes it unlawful for any person to drive a motor vehicle upon the public highways of this state when his license to drive or privilege to drive is canceled, suspended, or revoked. Therefore, to constitute the charge made against this particular defendant, the weight of the evidence must prove that the defendant did in fact drive a motor vehicle upon a public highway in this county while his license to drive was suspended. Before he could be found guilty, the evidence must prove to your satisfaction beyond any reasonable doubt that the defendant did drive a motor vehicle upon a public highway in this county when his driver's license was under suspension. If it proves that, he is guilty. If it fails to prove that, the law says he is not guilty. Depending entirely upon what you determine that the evidence proves, there is only one of two verdicts that you can render, either guilty or not guilty. Whatever that verdict may be, must be the verdict of all 12 jurors. Mr. Foreman, when this jury agrees, all 12 of you, upon a verdict, it becomes your duty to write that verdict out in ink on the lower left-hand corner of this indictment on the back side. You see right where my finger is, where I am wiggling my finger there. You probably cannot see that far away, but just get up a little closer. You will see the word verdict is written there. Under that word verdict are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines under it. It is in that space that you will write out the one word guilty or the two words not guilty. Once you write out that verdict, whatever it may be, then on the bottom line you sign your name, and you will see printed below the bottom line the word Foreman, and you will have this indictment in the room with you and also have 2 exhibits. You will have the 2 exhibits in the jury room with you, and you can look at those too, and also you can read the indictment.